This is High Park in Toronto, Canada. Half the size of New York City's Central Park, this public garden is frequented by thousands of people every day. Deeded to the city by the Howard family in 1873, High Park has since become a hotspot of paranormal activity, known for the wide variety of ghostly encounters reported here over the last century. The most well-known of these being the apparition of a pale lady, often appearing in the second-floor window of the historic Colburn Lodge. Colburn Lodge is one of the oldest buildings in town. In 1837, it was originally inhabited by John and Jemima Howard, a wealthy couple known for their charitable contributions to the community. For years, they lived peacefully in the lodge, until the early 1870s when Jemima was diagnosed with the first known case of breast cancer in Toronto. In 1875, 2 years before his wife's death, John, a prominent local Freemason at the time, began the construction of her final resting place. A gigantic tomb built in the traditional Scottish style, adorned at the top by a Masonic cross, and surrounded by a wrought iron fence shipped in from England, said to have been built by the legendary Freemason, Sir Christopher Wren. Hammered on morphine and laudanum to numb the pain, Jemima would spend the rest of her life locked away in her second-floor hospice room, staring through the window at her future burial site. Some say she still does to this very day. One night in 1969, a police officer on the beat in High Park was surprised to see an elderly woman, dressed in a moonlit nightgown, standing in the second-floor window of the Colburn Lodge. By the time he managed to get inside and up the stairs, she was gone. He couldn't help but notice that she was staring in the direction of Jemima Howard's burial plot. Similar reports have been filed over the years, from staff members and public alike, each reporting the presence of someone or something, often manifesting in the form of a woman in a white nightgown, staring off into the west. Why was John Howard so obsessed with Masonic symbolism? So much so that he implemented it into every facet of his wife's grave. What's the truth behind the story of Jemima Howard's life beyond the grave? Is it possible that years of pain and misery, warped by the consumption of mind-altering substances, caused her soul to grow tethered to the building? And what will it take for the Pale Lady of Colburn Lodge to find peace in the afterlife? Only time will tell. This is Grenadier Pond. Located in the southwestern corner of High Park in Toronto, it attracts locals, tourists, and anglers alike with its unique atmosphere and ecosystem. Its story begins during the War of 1812, in the aftermath of the Battle of York, when the city that would one day be known as Toronto fell into the hands of the American forces. Legend tells that a company of grenadiers, some of the finest soldiers in the King's Army, tried to cut through High Park and cross the frozen pond to escape the burning town. Over 50 men clad in green uniforms were too much weight for the ice to bear, and they all fell through, each and every one of them meeting their end. In the centuries since then, there have been an unsettling number of eyewitness accounts describing paranormal happenings in and around Grenadier Pond. Famously, 90 years after the Battle of York, the Toronto Star reported the appearance of an entity called the Phantom Rider. One night in April of 1903, a ghost who took the appearance of a 19th century soldier on horseback emerged from the lake and terrorized at least 20 witnesses, including 2 police officers. It is said that after it satisfied its thirst for blood, the entity returned to the depths of the pond, never to be heard from again. While the Phantom Rider of High Park hasn't been seen in over 120 years, people consistently encounter other members of the doomed military company. Many have reported strange sightings of soldiers dressed in green uniforms from a bygone era, hiding in the woods or trudging across the frozen pond during a snowstorm. It's no secret that for over 200 years, the local fishermen have reported disembodied voices seeming to come from across the water. Those who frequent the park tend to agree that some nefarious force exists at the bottom of Grenadier Pond. So what's really going on here? Is there any truth to the tale of 50 men meeting their demise at the bottom of the not-so-frozen pond. What about this so-called Phantom Rider? Could such an event really have taken place? Or was it simply a ghost story, drummed up by some reporter to scare children? And what about the lost souls, said to still wander Grenadier Pond and its surrounding area? Could this body of water truly be plagued by the spirits of dead soldiers? Only time will tell. This is Toronto's High Park. In previous episodes, we've explored the park's bloody origin and the lingering spirits of those who lived and died here. But very few are aware that this is also the site of one of the most catastrophic events in Toronto's history. In the early morning of January 2nd, 1884, on the Grand Trunk Railway, directly southeast of Grenadier Pond, 2 trains collided and burst into flame, resulting in the demise of at least 29 men. A freight train traveling into the city from the west was operated by engineer Richard Jeffrey and conductor George Barber, who both failed to read the employee timetable that morning. If they did, they would have known that a 2-car commuter train pulled by a dummy locomotive was coming straight toward them from the east on a single-track railway. The small train was carrying 29 workers about to begin their shifts at the Toronto Boltworks factory in the village of Swansea. At 6:57 a.m., during the most violent snowstorm of the season, steel met steel as the trains collided at 50 kilometers per hour. The freight train's boiler and furnace tore through the dummy's cabin, instantly ending 15 lives. The cabin was soon filled with steam from the boiler, leaving 14 other workers with fatal burns. This is considered to be one of the worst disasters in Toronto's history, and despite their negligence, both Jeffrey and Barber would eventually be acquitted of manslaughter. Many believe that the families of the victims didn't get the justice they deserved. 1 year later, an elderly John Howard, the founder of High Park, wrote in his diary that he saw something beyond belief. It was in the early morning, and a snowstorm raged outside his home as Howard awoke to the howling of a locomotive in the distance. When he looked out his window, he claimed to have seen a flaming pair of railway cars, identical to the ones torn to shreds the previous year. Suddenly, with a roar of thunder and a crash of lightning, it vanished into the storm. So goes the first documented sighting of the ghost train in High Park. Throughout the 1900s and to this very day, there are those who claim they've seen a train from hell, but only on nights when a winter storm hits the city hardest. So what's going on here? Why were the 2 men responsible exonerated of crimes that ruined so many families? Is it possible that this legal oversight has disturbed the souls of the tragedy's victims? Could it be that their specters return to High Park every winter in the same train that carried them into the afterlife? Only time will tell.